Climate. In Cairo, and along the Nile River Valley, the climate is a hot desert climate. Windstorms can be frequent, bringing Saharan dust into the city, from March to May, and the air often becomes uncomfortably dry. High temperatures in winter range from 14 to 22 degrees Celsius, while nighttime lows drop to below 11 degrees Celsius, often to 5 degrees Celsius. In summer, the highs rarely surpass 40 degrees Celsius, and lows drop to about 20 degrees Celsius. Rainfall is sparse and only happens in the colder months, but sudden showers can cause severe flooding. The summer months have high humidity due to its coastal location. Snowfall is extremely rare. A small amount of graupel, widely believed to be snow, fell on Cairo's easternmost suburbs on the 13th of December, 2013, the first time Cairo's area received this kind of precipitation in many decades. Dew points in the hottest months range from 13.9 degrees Celsius in June to 18.3 degrees Celsius in August. Weather to travel. Pollution. The air pollution in Cairo is a matter of serious concern. Greater Cairo's volatile aromatic hydrocarbon levels are higher than many other similar cities. Air quality measurements in Cairo have also been recording dangerous levels of lead, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and suspended particulate matter concentrations due to decades of unregulated vehicle emissions, urban industrial operations, and chaff and trash burning. There are over 4,500,000 cars on the streets of Cairo, 60% of which are over 10 years old, and therefore lack modern emission-cutting features. Cairo has a very poor dispersion factor because of its lack of rain and its layout of tall buildings and narrow streets, which create a bowl effect. In recent years, a black cloud of smog has appeared over Cairo every autumn due to temperature inversion. Smog causes serious respiratory diseases and eye irritations for the city's citizens. Tourists who are not familiar with such high levels of pollution must take extra care. Cairo also has many unregistered lead and copper smelters which heavily pollute the city. The results of this has been a permanent haze over the city with particulate matter in the air reaching over 3 times normal levels. It is estimated that 10,000 to 25,000 people a year in Cairo die due to air pollution-related diseases. Lead has been shown to cause harm to the central nervous system and neurotoxicity, particularly in children. In 1995, the first environmental acts were introduced and the situation has seen some improvement with 36 air monitoring stations and emissions tests on cars. 20,000 buses have also been commissioned to the city to improve congestion levels, which are very high. The city also suffers from a high level of land pollution. Cairo produces 10,000 tons of waste material each day, 4,000 tons of which is not collected or managed. This is a huge health hazard, and the Egyptian government is looking for ways to combat this. The Cairo Cleaning and Beautification Agency was founded to collect and recycle the waste. They work with the Zabaleen community that has been collecting and recycling Cairo's waste since the turn of the 20th century and live in an area known locally as Manshiat Nazar. Both are working together to pick up as much waste as possible within the city limits, though it remains a pressing problem. Water pollution is also a serious problem in the city as the sewer system tends to fail and overflow. On occasion, sewage has escaped onto the streets to create a health hazard. This problem is hoped to be solved by a new sewer system funded by the European Union, which could cope with the demand of the city. The dangerously high levels of mercury in the city's water system has global health officials concerned over related health risks. Economy. Cairo's economy has traditionally been based on governmental institutions and services, with the modern productive sector expanding in the 20th century to include developments in textiles and food processing, specifically the production of sugar cane. As of 2005, Egypt has the largest non-oil-based GDP in the Arab world. Cairo accounts for 11% of Egypt's population and 22% of its economy. The majority of the nation's commerce is generated there, or passes through the city. The great majority of publishing houses and media outlets and nearly all film studios are there, as are half of the nation's hospital beds and universities. This has fueled rapid construction in the city, with 1 building in 5 being less than 15 years old. This growth until recently surged well ahead of city services. Homes, roads, electricity, telephone and sewer services were all in short supply. Analysts trying to grasp the magnitude of the change coined terms like hyperurbanization, History. Ancient settlements. The area around present-day Cairo had long been a focal point of ancient Egypt due to its strategic location at the junction of the Nile Valley and the Nile Delta regions, which also placed it at the crossing of major routes between North Africa and the Levant. Memphis, the capital of Egypt during the Old Kingdom and a major city up until the Ptolemaic period, was located a short distance south of present-day Cairo. Heliopolis, another important city and major religious center, was located in what are now the northeastern suburbs of Cairo. It was largely destroyed by the Persian invasions in 525 BC and 343 BC and partly abandoned by the late 1st century BC. However, the origins of modern Cairo are generally traced back to a series of settlements in the 1st millennium AD. Around the turn of the 4th century, as Memphis was continuing to decline in importance, the Romans established a large fortress along the east bank of the Nile. The fortress, called Babylon, was built by the Roman Emperor Diocletian at the entrance of a canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea that was created earlier by Emperor Trajan. Further north of the fortress, near the present-day district of Al-Azbakiyah, was a port and fortified outpost known as Tindunias or Umdunain. While no structures older than the 7th century have been preserved in the area aside from the Roman fortifications, historical evidence suggests that a sizable city existed. The city was important enough that its bishop, Cyrus, participated in the Second Council of Ephesus in 449. However, the Byzantine-Sasanian War between 602 and 628 caused great hardship and likely caused much of the urban population to leave for the countryside, leaving the settlement partly deserted. The site today remains at the nucleus of the Coptic Orthodox community, which separated from the Roman and Byzantine churches in the late 4th century. Cairo's oldest extant churches, such as the Church of Saint Barbara and the Church of Saints Segius and Bacchus, are located inside the fortress walls in what is now known as Old Cairo or Coptic Cairo. Fustat and other early Islamic settlements. The Muslim conquest of Byzantine Egypt was led by Amr ibn al-As from 639 to 642. Babylon fortress was besieged in September 640 and fell in April 641. In 641 or early 642, after the surrender of Alexandria, he founded a new settlement next to the Babylon fortress. The city, known as Fustat, served as a garrison town and as the new administrative capital of Egypt. Historians such as Janet Abou-Lud and André Raymond trace the genesis of present-day Cairo to the foundation of Fustat. The choice of founding a new settlement at this inland location, instead of using the existing capital of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast, may have been due to the new conqueror's strategic priorities. One of the first projects of the new Muslim administration was to clear and reopen Trajan's ancient canal in order to ship grain more directly from Egypt to Medina, the capital of the Caliphate in Arabia. Ibn al-As also founded a mosque for the city at the same time, now known as the Mosque of Amr ibn al-As, the oldest mosque in Egypt and Africa. In 750, following the overthrow of the Umayyad Caliphate by the Abbasids, the new rulers created their own settlement to the northeast of Fustat which became the new provincial capital. This was known as Al-Askar as it was laid out like a military camp. A governor's residence and a new mosque were also added, with the latter completed in 786. In 861, on the orders of the Abbasid Caliph al-Mutawakkil, an ilometer was built on Rhoda Island near Fustat. Although it was repaired and given a new roof in later centuries, its basic structure is still preserved today, making it the oldest preserved Islamic-era structure in Cairo today. In 868 a commander of Tekic origin named Bakbak was sent to Egypt by the Abbasid Caliph al-Mutaz to restore order after a rebellion in the country. He was accompanied by his stepson, Ahmad ibn Tulan, who became effective governor of Egypt. Over time, Ibn Tulan gained an army and accumulated influence and wealth, allowing him to become the de facto independent ruler of both Egypt and Syria by 878. In 870, he used his growing wealth to found a new administrative capital, Al-Kate, to the northeast of Fustat and of Al-Askar. The new city included a palace known as the Dar al-Imara, a parade ground known as Al-Maidan, a bimaristan, and an aqueduct to supply water. Between 876 and 879 Ibn Tulan built a great mosque, now known as the Mosque of Ibn Tulun, at the center of the city, next to the palace. After his death in 884, Ibn Tulun was succeeded by his son and his descendants who continued a short-lived dynasty, the Tulunids. In 905, the Abbasids sent General Muhammad Sulayman al-Khatib to reassert direct control over the country. Tulunid rule was ended and al-Khatib was razed to the ground, except for the mosque which remains standing today. Foundation and expansion of Cairo. In 969, the Shia Ismaili Fatimid Empire conquered Egypt after ruling from Ifriqiya. The Fatimid general Jawhar al-Sakali founded a new fortified city northeast of Fustat and a former al-Khatib. It took 4 years to build the city, initially known as al-Manuriya, which was to serve as the new capital of the caliphate. During that time, the construction of the Al-Azhar Mosque was commissioned by order of the Caliph, which developed into the third oldest university in the world. Cairo would eventually become a center of learning, with the Library of Cairo containing hundreds of thousands of books. When Caliph al-Mu'tasim Allah arrived from the old Fatimid capital of Mahdia in Tunisia in 973, he gave the city its present name, Qahirat al-Mus, from which the name Cairo originates. The caliphs lived in a vast and lavish palace complex that occupied the heart of the city. Cairo remained a relatively exclusive royal city for most of this era, but during the tenure of Badr al-Gamali as vizier the restrictions were loosened for the first time and richer families from Fustat were allowed to move into the city. Between 1087 and 1092 Badr al-Gamali also rebuilt the city walls in stone and constructed the city gates of Bab al-Futa, Bab al-Nasr, and Bab Zuwila that still stand today. During the Fatimid period Fustat reached its apogee in size and prosperity, acting as a center of craftsmanship and international trade and as the area's main port on the Nile. Historical sources report that multi-story communal residences existed in the city, particularly in its center, which were typically inhabited by middle and lower class residents. Some of these were as high as 7 stories and could house some 200 to 350 people. They may have been similar to Roman insulae and may have been the prototypes for the rental apartment complexes which became common in the later Mamluk and Ottoman periods. However, in 1168 the Fatimid vizier Shawar set fire to unfortified Fustat to prevent its potential capture by Amalric, the Crusader king of Jerusalem. While the fire did not destroy the city and it continued to exist afterward, it did mark the beginning of its decline. Over the following centuries it was Cairo, the former palace city, that became the new economic center and attracted migration from Fustat. While the Crusaders did not capture the city in 1168, a continuing power struggle between Shawar, King Amalric, and the Zengid general Sheka led to the downfall of the Fatimid establishment. In 1169, Sheka's nephew Saladin was appointed as the new vizier of Egypt by the Fatimids and 2 years later he seized power from the family of the last Fatimid caliph, Al-Aid. As the first Sultan of Egypt, Saladin established the Ayyubid dynasty, based in Cairo, and aligned Egypt with the Sunni Abbasids, who were based in Baghdad. In 1176, Saladin began construction on the Cairo citadel, which was to serve as the seat of the Egyptian government until the mid-19th century. The construction of the citadel definitively ended Fatimid-built Cairo's status as an exclusive palace city and opened it up to common Egyptians and to foreign merchants, spurring its commercial development. Along with the citadel, Saladin also began the construction of a new 20-kilometer-long wall that would protect both Cairo and Fustat on their eastern side and connect them with the new citadel. These construction projects continued beyond Saladin's lifetime and were completed under his Ayyubid successors. Apogee and decline under the Mamluks. In 1250, during the Seventh Crusade, the Ayyubid dynasty had a crisis with the death of al-Salih and power transitioned instead to the Mamluks, partly with the help of al-Salih's wife, Shajar ad-Dur, who ruled for a brief period around this time. Mamluks were soldiers who were purchased as young slaves and raised to serve in the Sultan's army. Between 1250 and 1517 the throne of the Mamluk Sultanate passed from one Mamluk to another in a system of succession that was generally non-hereditary, but also frequently violent and chaotic. The Mamluk Empire nonetheless became a major power in the region and was responsible for repelling the advance of the Mongols and for eliminating the last Crusader states in the Levant. Despite their military character, the Mamluks were also prolific builders and left a rich architectural legacy throughout Cairo. Continuing a practice started by the Ayyubids, much of the land occupied by former Fatimid palaces was sold and replaced by newer buildings, becoming a prestigious site for the construction of Mamluk religious and funerary complexes. Construction projects initiated by the Mamluks pushed the city outward while also bringing new infrastructure to the center of the city. Meanwhile, Cairo flourished as a center of Islamic scholarship and a crossroads on the spice trade route among the civilizations in Afro-Eurasia. Under the reign of the Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad, Cairo reached its apogee in terms of population and wealth. By 1340, Cairo had a population of close to 500,000, making it the largest city west of China. Multi-story buildings occupied by rental apartments, known as Arab, became common in the Mamluk period and continued to be a feature of the city's housing during the later Ottoman period. These apartments were often laid out as multi-story duplexes or triplexes. They were sometimes attached to caravanserais, where the two lower floors were for commercial and storage purposes and the multiple stories above them were rented out to tenants. The oldest partially preserved example of this type of structure is the Wichala of Amir Qasim, built before 1341. Residential buildings were in turn organized into close-knit neighborhoods called aherat, which in many cases had gates that could be closed off at night or during disturbances. When the traveler Ibn Battuta first came to Cairo in 1326, he described it as the principal district of Egypt. When he passed through the area again on his return journey in 1348, the Black Death was ravaging most major cities. He cited reports of thousands of deaths per day in Cairo. Although Cairo avoided Europe's stagnation during the late Middle Ages, it could not escape the Black Death, which struck the city more than 50 times between 1348 and 1517. During its initial, and most deadly waves, approximately 200,000 people were killed by the plague, and, by the 15th century, Cairo's population had been reduced to between 150,000 and 300,000. The population decline was accompanied by a period of political instability between 1348 and 1412. It was nonetheless in this period that the largest Mamluk-era religious monument, the Madrasa Mosque of Sultan Hassan, was built. In the late 14th century the Beji Mamluks replaced the Beri Mamluks as rulers of the Mamluk state, but the Mamluk system continued to decline. Though the plagues returned frequently throughout the 15th century, Cairo remained a major metropolis and its population recovered in part through rural migration. More conscious efforts were conducted by rulers and city officials to redress the city's infrastructure and cleanliness. Its economy and politics also became more deeply connected with the wider Mediterranean. Some Mamluk sultans in this period, such as Babsay and Kate Bey, had relatively long and successful reigns. After al-Nasir Muhammad, Kate Bey was one of the most prolific patrons of art and architecture of the Mamluk era. He built or restored numerous monuments in Cairo, in addition to commissioning projects beyond Egypt. The crisis of Mamluk power and of Cairo's economic role deepened after Kate Bey. The city's status was diminished after Vasco da Gama discovered a sea route around the Cape of Good Hope between 1497 and 1499, thereby allowing spice traders to avoid Cairo. Ottoman rule. Cairo's political influence diminished significantly after the Ottomans defeated Sultan al-Ghuri in the Battle of Mauj-Dabik in 1516 and conquered Egypt in 1517. Ruling from Constantinople, Sultan Selim I relegated Egypt to a province, with Cairo as its capital. For this reason, the history of Cairo during Ottoman times is often described as inconsequential, especially in comparison to other time periods. However, during the 16th and 17th centuries, Cairo remained an important economic and cultural center. Although no longer on the spice route, the city facilitated the transportation of Yemeni coffee and Indian textiles, primarily to Anatolia, North Africa, and the Balkans. Cairene merchants were instrumental in bringing goods to the barren Hejaz, especially during the annual Hajj to Mecca. It was during this same period that Al-Azhar University reached the predominance among Islamic schools that it continues to hold today. Pilgrims on their way to Hajj often attested to the superiority of the institution, which had become associated with Egypt's body of Islamic scholars. The first printing press of the Middle East, printing in Hebrew, was established in Cairo c. 1557 by a scion of the Sonsino family of printers, Italian Jews of Ashkenazi origin who operated a press in Constantinople. The existence of the press is known solely from two fragments discovered in the Cairo Geniza. Under the Ottomans, Cairo expanded south and west from its nucleus around the citadel. The city was the second largest in the empire, behind Constantinople, and, although migration was not the primary source of Cairo's growth, 20% of its population at the end of the 18th century consisted of religious minorities and foreigners from around the Mediterranean. Still, when Napoleon arrived in Cairo in 1798, the city's population was less than 300,000, 40% lower than it was at the height of Mamluk and Cairene influence in the mid-14th century. The French occupation was short-lived as British and Ottoman forces, including a sizable Albanian contingent, recaptured the country in 1801. Cairo itself was besieged by a British and Ottoman force culminating with the French surrender on the 22nd of June 1801. The British vacated Egypt 2 years later, leaving the Ottomans, the Albanians, and the long-weakened Mamluks jostling for control of the country. Continued civil war allowed an Albanian named Muhammad Ali Pasha to ascend to the role of commander and eventually, with the approval of the religious establishment, Viceroy of Egypt in 1805. Modern era. Until his death in 1848, Muhammad Ali Pasha instituted a number of social and economic reforms that earned him the title of founder of modern Egypt. However, while Muhammad Ali initiated the construction of public buildings in the city, those reforms had minimal effect on Cairo's landscape. Bigger changes came to Cairo under Ismail Pasha, who continued the modernization processes started by his grandfather. Drawing inspiration from Paris, Ismail envisioned a city of maidens and wide avenues. Due to financial constraints, only some of them, in the area now composing downtown Cairo, came to fruition. Ismail also sought to modernize the city, which was merging with neighboring settlements, by establishing a public works ministry, bringing gas and lighting to the city, and opening a theater and opera house. The immense debt resulting from Ismail's projects provided a pretext for increasing European control, which culminated with the British invasion in 1882. The city's economic center quickly moved west toward the Nile, away from the historic Islamic Cairo section and toward the contemporary, European-style areas built by Ismail. Europeans accounted for 5% of Cairo's population at the end of the 19th century, by which point they held most top governmental positions. In 1906 the Heliopolis Oasis Company headed by the Belgian industrialist Eduard Empane and his Egyptian counterpart Bous Nuber, built a seabed called Heliopolis 10 kilometers from the center of Cairo. It represented the first large-scale attempt to promote its own architecture, known now as the Heliopolis style. In 1905 to 1907 the northern part of the Jezera Island was developed by the Beeler Company into Zamalek, which would later become Cairo's upscale chic neighborhood. In 1906 construction began on Garden City, a neighborhood of urban villas with gardens and curved streets. The British occupation was intended to be temporary, but it lasted well into the 20th century. Nationalists staged large-scale demonstrations in Cairo in 1919, 5 years after Egypt had been declared a British protectorate. Nevertheless, this led to Egypt's independence in 1922. 1924 Karakoram. The King Fouad edition of the Quran was first published on 10 July, 1924, in Cairo under the patronage of King Fouad. The goal of the government of the newly formed Kingdom of Egypt was not to delegitimize the other variant Quranic texts, but to eliminate errors found in Quranic texts used in state schools. A committee of teachers chose to preserve a single one of the canonical Qur'an readings, namely that of the Af version, an 8th century Kufic recitation. This edition has become the standard for modern printings of the Quran for much of the Islamic world. The publication has been called a terrific success, and the edition has been described as one now widely seen as the official text of the Quran, so popular among both Sunni and Shia that the common belief among less well-informed Muslims is that the Quran has a single, unambiguous reading. Minor amendments were made later in 1924 and in 1936 the Farouk edition in honor of then ruler, King Farouk. British occupation until 1956. British troops remained in the country until 1956. During this time, urban Cairo, sped by new bridges and transport links, continued to expand to include the upscale neighborhoods of Garden City, Zamalek, and Heliopolis.